Right, in this video, we'll be discussing monopoly demand, and this comes off the backdrop that now we understand the different characteristics of a monopoly, and some of these will definitely become important when we actually discuss monopoly demand. So, to understand monopoly pricing, we have a few basic assumptions that we have to know, right, or we have to put in place. So the first of all is that there are high barriers to entry, right? So this can be because of patents, it can be because of technology, it can be because of financial barriers to entry. And the firm is unregulated. So for now, we're going to keep the assumption that the firm is unregulated. The monopolist is unregulated. So no government unit regulates the firm. Um, to limit their price or to tell them what quantities to produce and so forth. And finally, also the firm is a single price monopolist, so there's no price discrimination. And we'll also actually drop this assumption. So assumption one and two, we will go on to drop soon. When we talk about regulated monopolies and then when we talk about price discrimination, so that we just get to understand these a bit more. So for now, we keep these assumptions. So the difference between a perfectly competitive market and a pure monopoly market is that you'll find that the monopolist faces the market demand curve. So this makes sense because the monopoly is the only firm in the market or the only firm in the industry. So the market or the industry demand curve is going to be the demand curve that the monopoly has to face. So that's what we get, and that's what we know. So to sell more and oh sorry, this demand curve has to be downward sloping. We know that the market demand curve or the industry demand curve is downward sloping. And for you to sell more, if you want to sell more goods when you have a downward sloping demand curve, you have to reduce the price. So for the monopolist to sell more goods on the market, they have to reduce the price. And this also means that the marginal revenue will always be less uh, than 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 the price. And we can actually show this on a graph why we always end up with a marginal revenue that's less than the price. So unlike in a perfectly competitive market where we saw that the marginal revenue was equal to the price and was also equal to the average revenue, this is not the case this time because they have to reduce the price in order to sell more. Whereas remember the firms demand curve in a perfectly competitive situation was a flat horizontal line, where marginal revenue was equal to the price. And this case, it's not that case, and we can actually illustrate that. So you see here, each time, so we can say that they initially start off at a point A, and at point A, the price is 142 rands for these goods, right? And when the price is 142 rands, they sell three goods. For them to sell more, based off what we just discussed, they need to reduce the price. The price needs to go down. So if the price goes down, they are going to lose some revenue based on the fact that the price has gone down. And that revenue that is lost is that red rectangle, and we can calculate that. It'll be 10 multiplied by 3, which is 30 rands. So they lose 30 rands, but they actually also gain some revenue because they've increased how many goods they're selling, and the gain in revenue is exactly equal to the new price because you are selling one more unit, right? Because now you're selling four, meaning that the gain in revenue is equal to the new price, which is 132. So you can see that the price cannot be equal to the marginal revenue because the marginal revenue is decreased. The 132 that you gain is reduced by the 30 rand that you lose by reducing the price. So at all points, except for the first unit sold, at all points, you will have a marginal revenue that is less than the price. So the marginal revenue curve and the demand curve will not coincide. So you can see this here. You can see the calculation where we calculate the marginal revenue, and you can see that the marginal revenue ends up being 102 rands, whereas the price is 132 rands. We know that because we said the price went from 142 rands to 132 rands, and because of that 30 rand lost, we lost this 30 rand by reducing the price, which is what we see here, the arrow that points downwards. All right, we lose that 30 rands revenue, which is like 10 rand per good almost, and then we gain 132 rands, which is this 132 rands that we gain because we sell an extra unit. And if we say 132 minus 30, we end up 102, which is less than our price of 132. So the marginal revenue, except for the first unit sold, um, will always be less than the price. So we can actually see this here, where this is the first unit sold. This is the point where the first unit will be sold. That's when the marginal revenue be equal to the price, because in this case, your marginal revenue, right, whatever you gain, is because you sold one more good. And coming from 0 to 1, all you gain is because you sold one more good, and you don't lose anything by selling one good. So that's why that's the only point where marginal revenue is equal to price. So that being said, we have to remember that the demand curve for a monopoly is going to be downward sloping. The monopolist's demand curve, the demand curve that the monopolist faces, is exactly the demand curve that the industry faces, because the monopolist is the industry. It's the only firm in the market. So you'll find that there's going to be a unique price for each output level, right? And that leads to that downward sloping curve. And obviously, to increase your sales, you need to reduce your price. And if you wanted to reduce your sales, obviously you do the vice versa. And the profit maximization rule is exactly the same as we had in a perfectly competitive market, where we say that we maximize profit where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. All right, so we need to maximize profit at the output where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So it's not about the price where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, but it's about the output where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And I'll actually illustrate that and explain that just now. And you find that this is different to what we see with a perfectly competitive market, because the price is the same all the time in a perfectly competitive market. Right, so here we go. We can look at this schedule that shows us the different marginal revenues and the different prices, the total revenues, and so forth. And when we look at this, you find that the point where we maximize our profit is where marginal revenue is approximately equal to marginal cost, which is at 5 units. So obviously, this is not exactly the maximum profit of 140 rands. It can be more than that, but because we're selling units of a good, this is where it's approximately equal. Because if it was to be 82 rands and 82 rands for marginal revenue and marginal cost, or some point where they're exactly equal, that would mean you have to sell maybe 5 point something goods or 4 point something goods, which doesn't necessarily make sense. So it's got to be at the point where they're approximately equal, and you can then illustrate this on a graph, and you'll see this is what your graph would look like. So I've just made it approximately equal to 5 units there, and your price will be 122 rands there. So what happens is that the monopolist has to choose the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, and that's at point A. You see, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is at point A. So from point A, you use the price that you are given by the demand curve. You do not use the price that's given by the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So you know that I'm going to produce 5 units because that's where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And then you go up to meet the demand curve. And at point B is where the quantity of 5 units that would maximize your profit meets the demand curve. And the price that corresponds to that, you have to then go across to the price axis, and the price you were told there is the price that you're going to sell at in order to maximize profit. So in order for this monopoly to maximize profit, they need to sell 5 units or produce 5 units and sell them at a price of 122 rands. Okay. And you'll find that there's no supply curve here because we don't need a relationship between, and there is actually no linear relationship between price and quantity supplied, and because we use the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost in order to figure out how much we're going to produce, and then we find the price from the demand curve. So there's no linear relationship, or there's no um, possible relationship between quantity supplied and and price in order for us to have a supply curve. So we will not have a supply curve when it comes to a perfect or a pure monopoly. All right. So that's what's explained there. So the next thing that we're going to go over in this chapter is going to be price discrimination. Also, if you want to read the notes regarding, for example, why there's no supply curve and more detailed notes on these things, you can find a link in the description where you can access the slides. So the link to the slides will be in the description. All right, thank you. Cheers.